I think we'll get started. Thank you all for joining us today. We're very pleased to have Mike Lipkin. Mike has a background in the physical sciences and worked on Wall Street for 23 years. He's taught event-driven finance for over 13 years at Columbia and NYU Camden. His research in price dynamics produced the first generally accepted explanations for stock picking, and also for the pricing and dynamics of hard to borrow stocks. Both our work with NYU's Marco Avarneda. And the work on turbulence is jointly done with Tim Young, who's essentially my counterpart at the University of Washington, Seattle. And Mike, why don't you take the floor? It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. That was very generous. Give me a second to figure out. I think I'm doing the instructions as they were relayed to me. Okay, and there's no mouse, right? So I just have to use the. Can I use the these keys? No. I wonder if I could use these keys, but they don't seem to work. Oh, that doesn't work either, does it? Oh, okay. So it's only the touchpad, but not these. Oh, now it works.
It does.
Great, you're a magician. Thank you very much. Can we? What is it, Peter, that you asked?
The right screen here is it's being blocked by this meeting being recorded, and that's what people in Zoom are
I did.
Okay.
Oh no, that's not what's visible on Zoom.
Zoom. Oh, they can see this. Okay. All right. That's fine.
All right. So sorry for that, but what would be a lecture without some hitches?
Yeah.
Okay. What I'd like to talk to you today about is turbulence in finance, and this is the turbulence that we associate with physical turbulence, not the turbulence that is. What?
The mic.
What about it?
You.
I don't need it. Can they hear me?
For Zoom.
Which one is it? This? Okay.
Maybe plug it up.
If I leave that in my pocket, I'm sure I'll get feedback and people will be going crazy. Okay, is this better for people on Zoom? Good, okay. So we're discussing turbulence in finance the way a physicist discusses turbulence, not the way someone on CNBC discusses turbulence, okay? And we'll make that quite clear as we go along. So this was a flash crash in an index. And this was a flash crash in a neighboring index. This is a flash crash in a commodity. This is a flash crash in a single name. This particular flash crash let me make a lot of money. We can discuss that later. This is a flash crash in a product Q-core, qual-core. And this is the same crash, but at a lower resolution. And take a look at it. It sort of looks boring at this resolution. And if you go back here, you see a lot of jagged peaks and valleys, but you don't see them on the low resolution. That will become relevant. This was a flash crash, but it got terminated by a stock halt because the earnings were leaked in advance. Okay, this is an Apple flash crash. And this is not a crash at all. It's a spike.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
Non-flash crashes?
Yes, spikes. Here's the spike. This is a flash spike.
Okay, so you mean by flash crash that it goes one way but not the other?
Well, let me discuss it when I've accumulated this zoology of events. So yeah, this is a spike. But the fact that it's going up instead of down is actually not relevant. This is another example of zooming up. And one more of zooming down, okay? Now, you may think, if you looked at the dates, you may notice that a lot of these are like from various times in the past. I mean, this is, 8 years ago. But that just happens to be that I collected these. So to make you understand that these are not things that used to happen and don't happen anymore, this was yesterday in a product, Arenia, AUPH. You can notice that when this occurs, there's a massive upwelling of trading, not a surprise, okay? So in other words, it's not like, oh, the stock makes a big move and everyone gets out of the way, there's no trading, right? You could conceive of that. You could conceive that the stock goes down because one guy wants to sell and there's no one there to buy. But you could see that's not actually the case here. This is very hard to see, but I didn't have something better. The point is, if you look at the graph at the in red, in the middle, you'll see that with the big move in the stock comes a huge increase in volatility. And you may think, this would not be unnatural, that the big movement is a reflection of high volatility. And in a technical sense, that is not true. We'll discuss that in a minute. So I'll take questions right off the bat after I just summarize the slide. So what seemed common in all these cases is that we have a shock, which, as I mentioned, doesn't have to be a crash. It could be a spike. We have kickback. That's very important. So the stock makes this big move one way, and then it jumps back the other way. It doesn't have to retrace all the way, but you have this big V at a very, very sharp V. And then you have wiggle. And this is accompanied by high trading volume. I wasn't able to show you the high trading volume of all those, but it's always there. And some of those graphs show the volume at the same time. And there's dissipation. So dissipation is obvious, but let me just say what it means to non-physicists, finance people. It means there's a lot of stuff going on, and then you wait a little bit, and then things are calmer. So whatever was going on has dissipated. And this seems reminiscent, this whole description of other dissipative structures. So let me pause for a minute, just in case my faithful scribe has collected a bunch of no questions. Good. All right. I'm sure there will be questions along the way. Peter, I sort of cut you off. Did you want to ask more?
I'm just noticing there's 3 chats. I mean, are those questions or? No? Okay. All right.
We're just asking if they could work with you.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
And the technical question you had was?
No.
Okay, very good. So let's take a look at something we're all familiar with, okay, which is a water drop. But let's look at what's going on here. You have an input into the system, which is a drop, right? And it disturbs the system in a local area a lot, even though it's not very extreme here, but it disturbs it a lot. And then what happens is the disturbance propagates away and in the process dissipates. So if you look far out in the distance, you have a steady state which doesn't notice what's happened here, both in time and in space. Eventually, this disturbance will get somewhere far in time, but it will be much quieter by then, okay? Far in space, but it will be much quieter by then. So we're familiar with systems that have a shock to them followed by some kind of wiggle, kickback, wiggle, and dissipation. Okay, now I assume everyone here is a finance person, but just in case, bear with me for 3 slides, okay? So this is a lightning review of classical finance. Derivative securities, options and called calls and puts, are what we can use. We trade them, we sell them and buy them, what we can use to value contingent risk. And they're respectively as we know the right to buy and sell in the future. So again, I apologize because most of you know this. And however, some of you may not know that a straddle consists of one call and one put struck on the same strike, same series, okay, same payout conditions. Okay, of course, one is paying when stock goes down, one is paying when it goes up, but all the criteria are identical. Okay, assuming that the stock price moves smoothly enough, and in a way that I will describe in a future slide, a Brownian process is smooth enough. Assuming that the stock moves smoothly enough, option prices only depend on what we know, the several fixed dates, rates, monies, and in the simplest model, a single parameter which measures the standard deviation, okay? It's the same parameter we would expect for a simple Brownian process. And we know it as the volatility. A mathematician knows it as standard deviation. It doesn't matter. It's a single parameter which measures somehow the risky moving of the stock in the time frame to expiration. Now, if we have an option position, we can hedge the option position using an appropriate model. And for the sake of simplicity, let's call the model that we'll use Black-Scholes. And in the limit that we hedge continuously, the return should be the fair value of the options. So now that's not for a single run, of course, right? It's in the ensemble. If we do this experiment many, many times, of course, you can't do that in real finance, but you can conceive of doing the experiment many times and hedging continuously, and the net result is the fair value of the options. Okay. Now, let me switch gears, and most of you will not know this, but the people who are more physics minded will have no problems with this. So here's a lightning view of physical turbulence in 3 slides. Let's take an open driven dynamical system. And you notice that I have a very strong opinion about economics. And recently, and I've been trumpeting this for 2 decades now, but recently there's been a lot of people agreeing with this, in particular Jean-Philippe Bouchot, who also was interested in this many years ago as well, but a number of people. You take an open system and you flood it with whatever it is you want to. And the open system is defined by the fact that it's porous to a driver. So energy can flow in, but it can flow out, and same with whatever it is that is the system. Okay, so it could be an economic system, it could be a biological system, it could be a physical system. If the driving force is mild, then something really wonderful happens. If you drive it enough, and what is enough depends on what the system is, okay, you get possibly ordered structures. And these are mediated solely by the geometry, okay? So let me give you an example, some examples. I actually gave a much shorter talk, 5 minutes of Bloomberg on this, so I used a lot of pictures. Here I'll just use 4. Okay, so what am I, here are flocking birds, okay? They can't collide with each other, so they have a nearly packed structure, okay? The middle one is classic Baynard convection. So if you take a fluid and you put a hot plate underneath it and you put a cool atmosphere above it, we know that the heat will diffuse through the liquid from the bottom to the top. But that's only the case if the driving force is small. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say the temperature of the hot plate and the temperature of the air are not too dissimilar. If you make that difference large enough, the liquid is very smart. What it does is it figures out that diffusion is inefficient. There is now enough free energy in the system that it can start exchanging by whirling. So you get whirls, and the whirls carry the hot liquid up to the top in a succession of whirls, and that gets the heat out of the system faster. So that's an ordered system, and you just have to drive it enough. Does anyone know what the red swirly thing is? Okay, you're too smart. Any chemist would know this. This was a revolutionary thing when it was first discovered. That's a driven chemical reaction system, which is oscillatory. You put in the driving force, which are reagent numbers. So you could think of it as, chemical potentials, driver. And it just causes the system to make these patterns in and out and in and out. You can get some very pretty ones. And the last one is dear to my heart. That's stock pinning at expiration. So if you have enough options that are open and in the hands of long hedgers, you will find that in the long run, stock will get stuck at a strike with some non-zero probability. And so the driving force are option numbers, if you like. The larger the number of options that are outstanding on a given line relative to everything else and relative to how much the stock trades, the stronger that will be. Okay, so that was my intro, and there's one more slide here, which is if you take any of these systems and you increase the driving force enough, you no longer have these pretty geometric forms that can form. You lose that. And what happens then is you get turbulence. And turbulence is basically a regime where fluctuations in an order parameter occur at all sizes. Of course, they're not going to occur at all sizes with equal likelihood, but I'll be more technical later on the other side of a middle section. So I'll return to that later. Any questions? It's a natural place to break. Okay. Now I'm going to show you a very, very famous graph from a revolutionary article that was written by Benoit Mandelbrot. This is his graph of the coastlines of those 5 countries which border the sea as measured by different scales. So you could find, in those days, of course, you didn't have GPS, you didn't have satellites, but what you could do is you could go into the library and you could find maps, and you could find maps of different scales, okay? And he found something amazing. If you took the maps and you measured the coastline, what you found was that they didn't converge. If you looked with greater magnification, you found the coastline was longer, and it kept getting longer without bound. And this is a graph that showed that. Okay, so I'd like to characterize coastlines and stock processes in a minute by something I'll call rough path. So you can imagine a series of measurements applied to the coastline performed by a set of rulers of diminishing amplitude. What Mandelbrot did was he found that the perimeter, the coastline, increased monotonically as the ruler got smaller and smaller. So as you're able to make more wiggles and measure more finely, okay, you're not converging. So the coastal length turns out to be a function of the length of the ruler. For people with more technical bent, the D refers to dimension, a Hausdorff dimension. It's not important. The important thing to know is that if you go into a library and your ruler is this small or this small or this small, or you fly overhead and you take a photograph, and then you do it, okay, you're going to find a different length every time. Now, let's define an operation on a rough path. Okay, so a succession of points on a rough path will be PI. So you're just walking along the perimeter and it's wiggling, doing lots of crazy stuff. But at various points successively, you're going to stop. So those points are labeled I, and you're going to do some procedure there, F of P sub I, okay? And in particular, for the purpose of this talk, we're going to be interested in the sum of these procedures. So you do a procedure at the first point, then you walk along the path, you get to a second point that you label 2, you do F of 2, you go to 3, F of 3, and so on. The coastal length is one such operation. In this case, the length increases without bound as the number of points, which goes like 1 over the ruler size, increases. But for another path, it's conceivable that the sum may converge to a fixed value. So that's Euclidean, right? If you take a circle and you start measuring it with smaller and smaller rulers, you still get the same circumference, okay? Now, we're going to call a path for which this procedure doesn't give you converges to limit, doesn't give you different numbers, as smooth. And with respect to this measuring procedure. So to define smooth, what we're going to say is we need a path and we need a procedure. So we need these two things. So this is not to be confused with what we mean by smooth if we're a topologist, okay? All right. Now imagine a stock process, S of T. So we can conceive of that as a rough curve, okay? And we can imagine a long straddle position in the underlier. So now let me explain my notation. It's not very difficult. If we own a call, if we buy a call at time t equals 0, that's struck on strike K and has expiration T in the future, okay? Well, not T in the future, but date T. And we buy a put that has the same parameters, that's a straddle. So we bought a straddle, and I'm going to denote it by 110 t equals 0. So what is my order quadruplet? It's one call, long one put, no shares of stock. That's the third entry, and the time is 0. Now, I'm going to walk along this stock process, and at defined intervals, t equals t sub I, I'm going to hedge my position to create a delta neutral position that's defined by Black-Scholes. Okay, so I can do that. The new position will be 11SI because I've transacted a certain amount of shares of stock. And the amount of shares of stock are going to be between 100 short and 100 long, but I'll use mathematician's notation. So it's between -1 and 1. Now we can keep track of our P&L. So what's our P&L? Our P&L is going to be the value of the call at time I, the value of the put at time I, the net change in our portfolio by buying and selling stock at the various points P sub j, or prices in this case, minus what we paid for it originally, C naught and P naught. Okay, obviously this assumes that there are no fees and no slippage. But you can imagine a situation like, let's say your Renaissance Technologies, where your fees are really, really small. So you can abstract to no fees and slippage. And the P&L will be an operation or a procedure in the previous sense, right? Every time we get to a point, we're going to do this hedging. Now, in classical equilibrium finance, the P&L will converge to the absolute initial mispricing of the straddle, okay? I told you before that this hedging in classical finance gives you the fair value, but it's possible that you paid a little bit too little or too much for the initial options. And so when you get done, you're going to have some value which will have this difference involved. Okay, that's not too important. That's not really important. Okay. Yes, but the point is it will converge. That's the point of classical finance. We go to the limit of continuous hedging. The hedging result is a consequence of this fact of classical finance, which is price paths are smooth in classical finance. So since we envision them as generated by a Brownian process, that means Brownian processes are smooth. So I know you know that a Brownian is a fractal, but the point is for the procedure I'm discussing, they're smooth. Okay. And this comes about from the fact that there's nothing to do if the price is really close. If you move and nothing's changed, there's nothing to do. Okay, so the question of interest in this, in the post-shock region, so remember, we had a shock, a kickback, and a wiggle. So we're not going to consider the shock and the kickback, but then we're going to consider what happens afterwards. In the post-shock region, are we in a region of just high volatility? Because the options will go crazy. And you saw one of those graphs where they went up to like 300 vol. Or is this fundamentally turbulent, meaning that we have a fundamentally rough price process? And the answer, the short answer, is financial turbulence is not the same as high volatility. In the shock region, prices evolve out of equilibrium. It's important. So what do I mean by prices? Well, you remember there are options that are trading during this time. It's important to understand what this means. Okay, if you pick a time scale, okay, in other words, you pick a ruler size, you pick how quickly we're going to resample the price process. In the shock region, you're going to find that all the derivative securities are mispriced. What do I mean by that? They obviously trade, there's a fair value for them. What you're going to find is that that value does not correspond to the ruler that you pick, unless you picked an actually amazing ruler size. There's one ruler size at one point in time that will exactly fit the prices, but the other ruler sizes won't. So we're going to see what happens as a result. I will show it to you. That's a good question, right? How do I know that this is rough, that the prices reflect a steady state pricing, but they don't reflect, there cannot be in the turbulent region a fair value price, okay? I'll explain that. That's a great question. Okay, so to the extent that, well, let me just summarize. To the extent that trading occurs on a shorter time scale over which the dissipation is happening, the options will be, the straddle price will be underpriced. And to the extent that trading occurs on a longer time scale, they're going to be overpriced. You remember that one single name where I showed you like on a lower time scale, right? And it looked pretty uncomplicated. The other one looked really sharp and jagged. Okay, well, this is what's going on. Now, let me get back to turbulence for a second, just to make it a little more mathematical. The system is said to experience turbulence if a characteristic order parameter experiences fluctuations of all orders of magnitude. For instance, fluid velocity in a turbulent liquid doesn't fall off exponentially. So what is this saying? It's saying if you look in the in your collection of liquid and you ask how the velocity changes from one time to another at a single place, instead of falling off exponentially to zero or to uniform, if it's just uniform flow, it falls off instead like a power law. Now, this is our one-dimensional price curve. We have a shock, we have a kickback, and then we have a wiggle. And in the turbulent region, we can identify some longer time scale t, but we also have a shorter time scale tau, which might be reflective of our hedging process. If stock prices are turbulent, then we would expect fluctuations in the stock price to go like some power law in that small time scale. Now, here's the answer to your question. Consider an ensemble of traders, each interacting with the market at different frequencies. Okay, now this is not a strong constraint. Let's say you trade in various strategies. You have a lot of strategies, or you trade in a complicated way. I could still partition your trading into trades that occur at fixed frequencies. So you're just an ensemble of frequency traders. But I want to isolate traders at a certain frequency. So the traders could be called G sub omega of sigma I. So omega is the frequency they're doing their trading at, and sigma I is the strategy that they choose. These traders would all agree on the value of puts and calls in normal price evolution, in quiescent times, in steady state times. But in the turbulent region, it turns out they all disagree on the value of puts and calls. Some of these traders think the puts should be more expensive. Some think they should be less expensive. So you may ask, well, why is it that you have a market? Well, the reason is that if someone wants to buy higher and someone wants to sell lower, they're going to create a steady state pricing. There will be a market, but that market is a fight not between people who all agree on the same price, but it's actually a fight between people who disagree. Okay, and so of course that may make the bid offer spread erratic on some longer time scale, but it's still out there. You see it. Okay. Well, this is the technical answer to your question. If we look, for example, at mankind after a shock kickback, we look in that region and we calculate the quadratic variance. What we find is that it's not uniform. It actually depends on whether we're measuring every 1 second, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 7 seconds. And this is the answer, right? In classical finance, that shouldn't matter. Okay, of course, there'll be some fuzziness in real life, but this is pretty straightforward here, and we'll see that it's even stronger than that. So this is the answer. Someone who is trading very fast, okay, like every 1 second, okay, they're going to see a large quadratic variance. So they're going to be willing to pay more for the straddle, because when they buy and sell, they're hedging the straddle, they're going to make money. But someone who trades much slower, he could never make money by buying the long straddle because his quadratic variance is much lower. So his fair value is lower. So this makes for a market with high frequency traders bidding up options and low frequency traders sellers. Okay, in particular, replication will be frequency dependent. The values of puts and calls will rise monotonically with frequency. So the hedging operation described earlier will not converge, and the higher the frequency, the higher the return via such a strategy. So in other words, real stock processes in the turbulent region are rough. They are turbulent. This is just a small little summary, but it's not too important, but let me just say it. You could imagine that you had a trading scheme that would return cash proportional to the size of fluctuations, right? So your trading scheme is to be long a straddle, okay? And if the fluctuations are high enough, you're going to make money. Okay, so then in time t, there are t over tau intervals, and we would like the fluctuations times those intervals to be larger than some constant p, okay? And so what we're basically saying is, like, you want to trade fast enough to monetize a long straddle. And this is just a quick calculation that tells you it tells you the critical frequency you have to trade faster than. By the way, this critical frequency would probably be the price of the straddle in the real market, because it's exactly the frequency that you can't make money if you bought or sold the straddle and were trading at this frequency. All right, so this is the proof. This was the same event where we did the hedging strategy. So we bought a long straddle and we hedged it, and we made money if we hedged it fast enough, and we lost money if we hedged it slow enough. Okay, so let me just conclude with a few slides. There's magic money making here. So rather than enter into the options market, you need the options market because you're going to use Black-Scholes to figure out how much stock to buy or sell. So you got to invert the options market you see. But that options market, remember, is a fight between people who think it's too cheap and people who think it's too fat, not everyone agreeing and having a stable price. So suppose that you bought a long straddle. Well, you better hedge with very high frequency. So you're going to be selling, buying, selling, buying, selling, buying all the time, right? But you could sell the same straddle. And now you want to hedge at okay, so you let the stock drift and you buy to lock in a small loss, and then you let it drift and you sell to lock in a small loss, and so on. But notice you can be the same person. So if you're the same person, then you actually have a stock only strategy that will make money in the turbulent region. Okay, it's at this point when I was giving the same talk in Amsterdam that someone said, "That's impossible," and he left. He just stormed out. However, I will assure you I've made money, although on the short side, because I can't trade fast enough to monetize this from the long side. Okay, so in physical systems, energy is transferred from local shocks to the system globally, ultimately in the form of heat. And a transfer may be by cascade from large-scale turbulence to smaller and smaller length scales. This is a very classical view of turbulence due to Kolmogorov. It's a very famous paper, and he produces some scaling laws. But we have a problem here. Stock prices are one-dimensional. So how is whatever we think of as energy, the fluctuations in the stock price, how is that removed, right? Well, first we need the stand-in for energy, but I have it there, the fluctuations in the stock price. So the question is, what would be a mechanism for reducing this to baseline? So let me go back to the flash crash in mankind. You have this red region where there's a shock and a kickback. And then you have that yellow, well, that's blue, sorry. And then you have a yellow region where you have presumably turbulence. And eventually you reach a red region where all traders, no matter what frequency they trade at, agree on what the fair value of the puts and calls is. Okay, but we've already seen that in the turbulent region, they don't agree. So we expect that there should be some form which takes the quadratic variance from depending on frequency to one that doesn't depend on frequency, to a long time limit. And if there is a universal scalable dissipation, the yellow area was where it must reside. Well, let me show you an amazing curve. So if we take quadratic variance and we scale it by trade time, okay, so we change the clock. The clock completely depends on whether or not, how fast you're trading and so on. Then all those curves fall together. Okay, well, it's sort of re-saying what I said before because it looks so regular, the fact that the quadratic variance seemed to depend on the frequency, but it depends on the frequency in a very, very strong way. All right, so in the turbulent region, both long and short strategies are money makers, but as turbulence abates, the ability to profit from the long side shifts to higher and higher frequencies. The turbulence is going away, and unless you can, and the curve doesn't look rough unless you're trading at extremely high frequencies. So eventually you run into the ultraviolet cutoff and you're like done. So natural question is, does turbulence persist for extended periods? If not, only very high frequency traders would make money from the long side. And that's probably true, but I've seen turbulence that persists for 2 to 3 days, but it's in less liquid things, single names. So let me conclude. I may have gone too short, but I don't think anyone will complain if the talk is shorter than normal. So financial systems behave similarly to open natural systems, whether biological, chemical, physical, and so on, in dissipating shocks. If dissipation is slow enough, then it may be monetized by dispersion trading of a very particular kind that I was discussing here. Not the classic dispersion trading where you're talking about multiple instruments, but shocks initiate a region of out of equilibrium prices, okay? To be discovered if, and I don't think I'm going to be the person who discovers this, but the question is there a fluctuation dissipation theorem for finance? Is there a scaling law for temporal price dissipation? And that's it. Yeah.
Could you remind me what the fluctuation dissipation theorem is?
It relates the size of fluctuations to the scale of how they disappear. And it's a constraint that comes about strongly in thermodynamic systems, but whether it exists in finance is.
Well, because yeah, I mean, if you really have turbulence at the same mathematical form, finance fluid.
Well, here's the problem. There is something I haven't dwelt on. It's clear this works. It's also clear that we have the scaling law, okay? What's not clear is why. So let me tell you, in physical systems, you can't really have one-dimensional turbulence. You can have 2- and 3-dimensional turbulence, and you can have scaling, but one dimension, you can't really have it. But we have a one-dimensional system. We have a stock price. That's it, okay? So there must be an effective second dimension there, or other dimensions as well. Okay, now maybe it's the option prices, okay, but I don't know. So there's something hidden here, but it's clear that in the shock region, these prices follow a rough path. Otherwise, we wouldn't have quadratic variances that are functions of frequency. Yeah.
I've actually thought about this sort of thing. Nassim Taleb was standing where you are a couple of weeks ago, and he said something interesting that I'm thinking about, which is the idea that markets behave sort of like people trying to reach crowded rooms. And what I translated that into is the idea that there is a finite and what's happening in these flash crash situations is that something has happened where the market just cannot compete equally in price back.
Well, I will not only not disagree with you, but I will also say that I can't grok it in the standard way, because all I'm doing is observing the fact that these are turbulent, okay? Now, you can imagine many, many reasons, possibly, including one of information bottlenecks and so on. But the point is, the question is, does that give you a handle on this? And I guess the answer would have to be, well, if you take that model of an information bottleneck, what you like to reproduce is something like I showed you for the quadratic variance in the okay. So I'm agnostic to whether that's the way to go. Okay, you'll admit that I haven't gone that way. All I've done is I've given you a way of measuring the turbulence in this region and pointed out to you that it's true turbulence, not not high volatility. Okay, but that's all I've done.
Yeah, we have a question from Steve.
Okay.
Did you read it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have two questions actually.
Okay.
Two.
Yeah. If
Okay.
there's turbulence in stock prices, you expect to see not trivial multi-capital burst. Can the higher order of work be traded through instrument analogous to straddle in one case?
Can I read the quote?
Yeah. And also, could you read it out with the mics so that everybody can hear it?
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
mics
you.
are here.
Okay. Well, this first question is not by Steve, but so let's give Mr. Nayar his props. If there is turbulence in stock prices, you expect to see non-trivial multifractal Hursts. Can the higher order Hurst be traded through instruments analogous to straddles in your case? I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
Okay, it's reasonable to look, people have discussed turbulence in terms of multifractals and so on, but I don't really know that that's gone anywhere. It could be functionally important. I simply think that there are two issues here. One is I've given you a very simple way to monetize it. However, what I will fairly point out to you is the time scale over which you get to monetize it is short and infrequent, right? You'd have to be able to scan the entire market, see an event, immediately jump in. Now, I happen to be doing that a few times, and I was able to trade from the short side. So I sold the straddle. And then, of course, it got me agita because it was bouncing all over the place. But of course, I rigorously waited and hedged very slowly and did make money. But that doesn't tell you in the long run that you do that. It was only anecdotal. So again, back to the question here. The questions you guys have asked have to do with deeper models, okay? And I don't have a deep model for this. I just have the fact and the regularity. So, and I'm not sure that there's a real in quotes model. I think you could make many models, and the models have to be checked to make sure they give you the same results. And then it's a function of whether you find that model is useful for your purposes. So, okay, that's a long answer saying basically I don't know. Okay, from Steve, does the trading by those who can do your trade at different frequencies decrease or increase the turbulence? Okay, so that's a great question. My bet is it decreases it. My bet is the reason the turbulence abates is because people constrain the stock enough and suck out. What they're doing, remember, is they're removing cash from the system. So when you have this turbulence, right, you have people who are trading and they're extracting cash. And I think in the process of doing that, the system becomes more and more quiescent. So I don't believe they increase the turbulence. I think the turbulence has come about because there's an injection of news possibly that causes people to go in and do a lot of trading. And the people who are smart traders who trade against the avalanche of news traders are the people who like quiet things down. But this is just my assumption. The practical fact is that this thing can't go on forever, right? That would, if it went on forever, that would be equivalent to huge inflows, unlimited inflows of capital to the system. And in practice, that doesn't happen. Yeah.
I would think, well, the one thing that I could say to that is that my understanding is in general, trading does increase volume. So,
well, I wouldn't even go out on a limb and say that makes any sense in this region, because the equivalent of the volatility, in other words, like if you take the straddle market and you invert Black-Scholes, you'll get very high vols, like 300, 400, 500. And of course, as I pointed out, that's just the mean value. Okay, all the traders have different values for that, and that's just where it's come out in the middle. But it's so high that it's not clear to me that the trading is increasing volatility at this point as opposed to removing it. Okay, all right. Thank you very much, everyone. Oh, one more.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So the question asks the following: why is 1D a problem? And the answer to that is 1D is a problem. And the example in the question of a spring, a single 1D spring does not exhibit turbulence. Okay. Now you can create systems where there are couplings where effectively you have a second dimension, but it's physically not possible to have turbulence in one dimension. Okay. So there have to be hidden dimensions. Okay. In order to do this, but that's a theorem in physics, and there may well be exceptions to it, but I don't really know the math and the physics well enough to tell you that. Yeah. I don't know the answer to that either. So the question was, is there an SDE description? And I would doubt it.
No,
Okay.
So I guess I know.
Oh, you know. Okay, good. You answer, Peter.
So, all right. I mean, so SDE stands for stochastic differential equations, first of all, and so SDEs can describe a set of processes called semi-martingales. Okay, and those are the types of processes that, let's say, are equilibrium, describe what Mike would call equilibrium behavior. Okay, where there's essentially, things are, it describes the setting where, in Mike's language, everything is dissipated and we're back to normal. Okay, so we're in equilibrium. So that's semi-martingales. And so SDEs can also describe the opposite of semi-martingales. Okay, which would be, for example, rough paths. Okay, stochastic processes, rough paths. Okay, and so the let's say, how do you distinguish between these two types of processes? Okay, semi-martingales on the one hand, which is equilibrium behavior, and stochastic processes with rough paths, it's out of equilibrium behavior. Okay, so the answer is, Mike actually said, is that like start in discrete time. Okay, and we're going to go to continuous time, which is where Ravant's question is residing, because he's talking about stochastic differential equations in continuous time. But nonetheless, we're going to start in discrete time, and you start to do measurements in discrete time. Like, so for example, you measure in discrete time the sum of the squares of the changes, okay, and you accumulate them up, okay? And then you're in discrete time and you can start to work with smaller time intervals, okay? And you again calculate the sum of the squares of the changes. Okay, so as you go to the limit of infinitesimally small time intervals, and you're always calculating the sum of the squares of the changes, the big question is, do you converge to a finite number or not, okay? If you converge to a finite number, you're talking about semi-martingales. If you converge to an infinite number, you're not talking about semi-martingales. You're talking about processes with rough paths, okay, out of equilibrium behavior, which I want to say is like a way of describing what you're calling turbulence. Like, and I think maybe you're thinking of, as you said, you're thinking of turbulence from a physics perspective. So it's maybe a special case of the rough paths that I'm talking about, but it's, so I think the reason the guy walked out of the room in Amsterdam is his worldview is every process is a semi-martingale, okay? And in that worldview,
he walked out when I
Okay.
pointed out he could make money by doing opposite trading schemes.
Right.
You could
Right.
sell or buy the
Right.
straddle
So-
and
yeah,
do
so
the
he
right
knew a
thing.
theorem which says If you have a Sunday martingale, then you cannot make money doing that kind of thing, but it's a big if. Okay, yeah.
And actually, that was embarrassing for him because I have the evidence for it.
Yeah.
I can make money. This is, the measurement confirmed. Yes. So, okay. Let me just conclude by saying that I had a great time coming here, but I want to say one thing, which is a lot of what we teach in the spring semester in event-driven finance is all about stuff like this. It's turbulence, it's takeovers, it's, situations which are beyond the simple classical description and but which are very relevant to real trading. So if anyone liked this and they want to sign up for a course in the spring, that's my ad.
Yeah, so let me elaborate on that. So Mike will be teaching, co-teaching a class called Event-Driven Finance this spring. And, if you enjoyed this, feel free to sign up for it. So, okay, so with that, we'll wrap up. So I want to thank everybody who came both virtually and in the room. And the speaker next week will be me. So I'll be talking about optionality as a binary operation. Okay, so see you then. Goodbye. No, it hasn't met yet. So, yeah. You scheduled the teaching. No, I don't know. Yeah. It's